Hi, so the person who handles this request is not available at the moment. Would you mind calling back later on today?
They are the lords of Hollywood for the most part, and they yield a lot of power. And God forbid you should buck that power, you will immediately be labeled as being anti-Semitic and not part of the crowd, the in crowd. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah, the person who we're trying to reach, they're currently at lunchtime right now. Can you go ahead and call back a little after 2:30?
Movies are just entertainment. Don't take it too seriously. That is one of Hollywood's big lies.
Yeah, they're still not back from lunch.
Nepotism is hiring someone because they're family. Cronyism is hiring someone because they're friends. Favoritism is hiring someone based on some arbitrary factor that you favor.
Well, it's just simply that we cannot accept unsolicited material.
What would be the reaction of many people in Hollywood today if all of a sudden we said, 60% of the upper management in Hollywood and the top level executives are Christians? What would be the reaction to that?
When you are finished, hang up or hold for more options.
We've looked at the Hollywood-based movie studios and how they indoctrinate the youth, defame whole populations, and use unethical, predatory, and illegal business practices to keep the control group in power and deem everyone else unsolicited objects. Now let's take a look at how the New York-based mainstream media has expanded Hollywood's predatory business practices to indoctrinate and control us when we are older. This is where the real action takes place because after years of processing from politically correct Hollywood movies, the average young adult is now willing to swallow almost any lie about any person, company, or presidential candidate that is promoted or demonized by the corporate fascists in the New York network's control group. Yes, TV advertising is very expensive. Thus, only billionaires, large corporations, unions, associations, super PAC-funded candidates, and governments can afford fees of $5,000 to $1 million per minute. Only the rich, therefore, get to advertise and promote their products, causes, and issues on network TV.
In Hillary Clinton's America, the system stays rigged against Americans.
The amount of money it costs today to run for Congress or even to run for president is obscene. And most of that money goes into television commercials and spots and all of the mass media advertising that needs to be done to reach a vast number of people. Therefore, the media becomes the client of the government, or at least the person who's running for office. And when that person wins, if the media has supported him, naturally he wants to pay them back. He may not think of that consciously, but in appropriating licenses and expanding territories and allowing them to own more than one media outlet, that's exactly what happens. As a result, the number of media companies, as we said before, has concentrated in a few hands. And unfortunately, Congress and the media work together to present an image to the American people that does not always include every aspect of the truth.
The public thus gets advertisements, programs, and so-called fake news that endlessly distort reality by spinning issues to align with the agenda of the mass media control group. This means American citizens are exposed to a very selective and narrow spectrum of products, issues, and causes on network TV.
Anderson, this is a significant development.
Let's say we're talking about some applicants for employment as anchors on a news program, major media news program. And so here we have three, A, B, and C, and they're all equally talented. They would all be capable of performing that function. One is a conservative, one is a moderate, and one is a liberal. And if the choice by the media mogul who's hiring these people is, well, I'm going to take the liberal because I want to promote a political ideology. I want to use my media power to promote that type of political policy. Would we say that's restraint of trade? Well, it's not restraint of trade perhaps in the economic sense, because the person who is chosen, the liberal who is chosen, has the ability to perform that job equally with the other two. But it's restraint of trade in these ideas. And if you think of the media as having some kind of duty to the public, to provide a broad spectrum of political ideas, some kind of political diversity, you'd say, well, yes, this is a kind of restraint of trade.
Let's take a look at some of the products, issues, and causes we do see in TV advertisements, on the evening news, and in various programs to the exclusion of all others. Some of the products we see ad nauseum are pharmaceutical drugs, oil-burning cars, debt-peddling banks, sickness-exploiting insurance, brain cell-killing liquor.
6 major conglomerates that control almost all of the mainstream media, and they're right in bed with big pharma and right in bed with the big defense contractors. Or who do you see advertising on TV? It's pharmaceutical companies, it's the car manufacturers who are being subsidized by the US government. So you've got these major corporations that are all in bed together. They're in the club, like George Carlin said. There's a club, you're not in it.
Rarely or never seen are vitamins, electric cars, guns for self-protection, fusion, solar, or anything Nikola Tesla invented or would have approved of.
I don't think no country worldwide will have real freedom before free energy and free uncontrollable communications. That's when freedom will come. More than 100 years ago, Tesla was talking about this, and I don't think what's really happening, why we have to send all these troops out to protect pipelines and produce all these weapons, get in a war for energy, get communications controlled that much, and spend billions of the dollars when we can really have our own energy here and other countries can have, or we can just take energy from Amazon, distribute to the earth, standard of the living will be perfect and everybody will be free. That would be really freedom.
Issues constantly pushed are gun control, but never the militia of the several states. Gay marriage, but rarely traditional marriage. Keynesian economics, but never Austrian economics.
If people care about peace and prosperity, they have no choice. They have to go with free market Austrian economics, and they have to give up on regulations and economic controls by the Keynesian ideas.
Socialized medicine, but never free market competition in the health industry. Radical women's lib, but never stay-at-home moms. The living constitution, but never the original intent of the founders. Incarceration for drug users, but rarely rehabilitation. Big pharma-assisted psychiatry, but never meditation or pastoral counseling.
The reason why so many people are on pharmaceutical drugs today, specifically psychiatric drugs, is because the psychiatrists are convincing the public that they have a brain abnormality with no science, no facts, just based off of checklists. It's very subjective. So the marketing has been that there's something wrong with your brain, when in fact, there's no science behind it.
Depression, a serious medical condition affecting over 20 million Americans. While the cause is unknown, depression may be related to an imbalance of natural chemicals between nerve cells in the brain. Prescription Zoloft works to correct this imbalance.
And the drugs actually hurt the brain, and the drugs increase violence, cause psychosis, mania, and this is a terrible thing that is happening to the public. So it's false advertising.
Including risk of suicide may occur.
Other side effects may include dry mouth.
The most common side effects are dry mouth, headache, constipation, and abdominal pain.
Or dizzy when you stand up.
Headache, diarrhea, and abdominal pain could be side effects.
And as far as causes, the mainstream media endlessly pushes the progressive cause, but rarely the conservative cause. The Democrats are heroes, but the Republicans are villains.
You know, the activists, gang up on the conservatives and vice versa, and that exists within the studio system as well. And the media drives Hollywood and has a big impact because they do all the promotion of all this activist agenda that we see creeping into our television series today and most of our movies.
Donald Trump is unfit for office, but Hillary Clinton is what America needs. Collectivism is for the greater good, but individualism is selfish. Multiculturalism is the future, but assimilation is xenophobic. Socialism is good, but capitalism is evil. Cooperation is desired, but competition is Darwinian.
If the 20th century taught any lesson whatsoever, it was that socialism was not only unworkable, but that it was vastly destructive. Right? Killed millions and millions of people, caused wars and so forth and so on, economic collapse, you name it. Socialism was an idea that should have been proven by the 20th century to be completely useless. And what do we have today? Well, the major media people, they're still promoting socialistic ideas.
Welfare is more important than national defense. Globalization is good, but anything else is isolationist. Tariffs are bad, but taxes are a godsend. Secularism is sane, but religion is loony. World government is progressive, but national sovereignty is fascist.
I think the United States should say to other nations, look, we've built a pretty good deal here. We've got a pretty good thing going in this United States of America. Why don't you adopt what we've done, right? Here's a copy of our Constitution. Take it, use it, right? And we'll get back to using it more ourselves while you're doing that as well.
Big government is necessary, but limited government is obsolete. Political correctness is proper, but all else is hate speech. Gold and silver are archaic, but fiat currency is modern. As one can see, there are many products, issues, and causes the mainstream media promotes and suppresses. It would be difficult to cover all that's suppressed, but these things could be classified as ideas, inventions, and innovations that stand between our current stagnant civilization and what our civilization could be with the power of creative individuals not truncated by media trolls on the bridge to liberty.
So James, I'm going to take down all your information and pass it along to the right person.
It seems that the criteria the mainstream media uses to determine what it will promote and what it will suppress can almost be summarized in a single word: collectivism.
Collectivism is merely the broad description for an ideology that is based on certain principles, but the main one being that the group, the collective, is more important than the individual, and that the individual should be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. And if you can get that concept in your mind that, wait a minute, it's not a question of numbers, but of human rights and the dignity of an individual. And then if you say that the individual is the cornerstone of society and that to protect the rights of the individual, if you can do that, that is the greater good for the greater number, then you're on target again.
The control group operates on a collectivist philosophy, an anti-competition, anti-free market philosophy that promotes the central planning F.A. Hayek warned us about in The Road to Serfdom.
If people care about peace and prosperity, they have no choice. They have to go with free market Austrian economics, and they have to give up on regulations and economic controls by the Keynesian ideas.
The collectivist is thus always seeking to maximize profit through consolidation, a consolidation he justifies by economies of scale. The problem with this smokestack economic theory is that it relies on globalization to increase stockholder value rather than innovation. In other words, the globalist seeks profit by selling more of the same tired products across global markets than attempting to produce new and better products through innovation. So the obsession with consolidation is actually a pathology of the collectivist mentality, dramatizing the desire for endless profit through endless domination.
Why is it a leap of belief or a conspiracy theory to think that the very entities and corporate lawyers that have consolidated hundreds of movie companies and distributors down into 6 entities are not the same mentality that wants to push a globalist agenda, an agenda to consolidate the 160 or 80 nation states down to one huge nation? It's all consolidation, it's all collectivism, or as C. Wright Mills put it, the power elite, the control group of the planet Earth, if you will.
As related by media expert Ben Bagdakian, we've seen how hundreds of media companies were consolidated down to just 50. And then, by 2004, those 50 were further consolidated to just 5. Today, as we've previously seen, we stand at 6.
If you go back about 100 years ago, the National Banking Association and others put out reports saying we need to buy up the media because it was diversified then, and it was anti-establishment, pro-constitution on average, very populist though. They said we're going to buy this up and basically get it to where there's no real investigative journalism going on, and where the establishment is given a free hand to do whatever they want, a get out of jail free card. And that's what the dinosaur media is. That's my name for the mainstream media. They're a group that lies incessantly. They're a group that spins. They're a group that is engaged in repeating the press releases that they're given by select corporations and government. They're basically the propaganda corps for the globalist.
Mainstream media, CNN in particular, does not care about the public outside of their indoctrination mission to eliminate borders and basically destroy the nuclear family.
You have 6 major media corporations or conglomerates in this country today. Too much consolidation results in stultification. And then the stultification actually feeds back and allows for greater consolidation.
Additionally, those of us that are privy to CNN's bullshit don't watch it anyway.
And their product tends to be more or less uniform. Are political ideas uniform? No. Economic ideas? No. Social ideas? No. So where is the competition? If you don't have competition in the system, then by hypothesis you have monopolistic or oligopolistic situation.
The mainstream media, if not actively imploding, is at a very minimum really worried, and they see the writing on the wall.
Given the pathological obsession the collectivist has for consolidation, why would word processor crazy corporate attorneys not apply the same mentality to the consolidation of governments, even governments across the world?
They seek to create a stagnant system where no one can threaten their monopoly. The mainstream media is the deceptive propaganda arm of the mega corporations and governments that are monopoly men, that are social engineers seeking for a managed, controlled economy where risk is made public, we have to pay for it, but profits are private to them.
World government, the ultimate merger, is the epitome of the globalist agenda. And the success of such an agenda depends on the cooperation of world populations in something called free trade. Thus, America and every nation's population must be indoctrinated by the mainstream media into accepting so-called free trade, what Pat Buchanan calls the Trojan horse to world government. But as we've all seen, the so-called free trade foisted upon us by globalist bodies is really managed trade. And this managed trade has been endlessly promoted by the New York media to the point whereby it has now destroyed not only the U.S. manufacturing base, but much of the American middle class.
We find that in the motion picture industry today, all of the subtle little signals and the messages that are built into the storylines supports the concept that collectivism is a good thing. And it's a very subtle thing, and I'm sure, many people don't get these little messages and signals because they're not familiar with the concepts we're talking about. And so indirectly, their attitudes about their political place in the world, whether collectivism is good or individualism is better, what kind of a system do we really want to live under? These concepts are being eroded or actually being poisoned by the subtle messages that come out of Hollywood.
Karl Marx would be proud. Earlier, we covered cultural Marxism, the Frankfurt School's gift to Hollywood's executives and America's youth. Now let's take a look at corporate fascism and see how both of these brainwashing technologies are ultimately totalitarian and ultimately leading young and old down the road to serfdom.
An email address. I'm getting a call on the other line. Can you hold for 1 second?
Sure.
The term corporate fascism means the merging of corporate and state power, such that corporate power prevails.
We saw fascism in Second World War when the state and the corporates merged. However, the state basically was the supreme power. Today's new corporate fascism, we could say the corporations basically dominate the state. And the way they do that is by literally purchasing the state. They buy up all the media and the advertising so that they can get their political representatives into power. They fund the campaigns of congressmen, and they basically filter these people into the Congress to pass laws that are favorable to the corporations. So today we have a unique form of fascism known as corporate fascism.
Recall that cultural Marxism means economic, political Marxism translated into cultural terms. Again, both corporate fascism and cultural Marxism are totalitarian in nature and thus require big, if not unlimited, government, whereas the U.S. Constitution calls for limited government.
Both cultural Marxism and corporate fascism are totalitarian in nature because both worship the power of the state. Either the power of the state to force you to be a certain way, that's the cultural Marxist viewpoint, and the corporate fascist way is, well, to control your economic livelihood, they control what you can and can't do for a living, they want to control your choices. So both of them believe in big government, believe in transnational corporations, believe in the economic power being taken out of the hands of the people, believe in unrestrained government for their own particular uses.
Given this, corporate fascism requires the media conglomerates to be overly cooperative with the state, which always wants to expand. Yes, the globalists are hell-bent on using the mainstream media and its two ugly wings, the cultural Marxist-infested Hollywood studios and the corporate fascist-infested New York networks, to reduce the United States to but a province in their one-world government.
The largest, of course, would be the United Nations. And a lot of other globalist organizations that we know of that exist, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and all these, they're all subsidiaries of the United Nations. What is their purpose? Their purpose is to take control of the planet. I lament the fact that many people in our country have not ever read the Constitution of the United States. But far fewer people have ever read the Charter of the United Nations. Article 25 of the Charter of the United Nations, very small, one sentence. It says, all members of the United Nations agree to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council. As a member of the United Nations, therefore, the United States has agreed that we will accept the decisions of the Security Council of the United Nations. Forget the Constitution. There's a subsidiary of the United Nations called NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. How did we get into Iraq? Well, we got into Iraq because of a United Nations resolution. So globalism, no thank you. Independence, yes.
Recall, the Supreme Court found in the case of Burston versus Wilson that motion pictures are a significant medium for the communication of ideas, and these ideas can affect attitudes and behavior in a variety of ways. By this, the court implied that motion pictures are so powerful they don't just influence individual behavior, they can influence all of society's behavior.
The mainstream media facilitates the globalist program of disarming the people by demonizing gun owners, by implying we're terrorists, by implying we're guilty for what bad people do with guns. And they basically push this unified front that you're bad because you believe in the Second Amendment that this country was founded on. 1776 happened because the redcoats came for the ball and powder. They came for the guns. So the truth is, the people demonizing the Second Amendment are the real enemies of the Republic.
If this is true, that our behavior can be shaped by movies that are mere entertainment, shouldn't we be concerned about what the control group at conglomerate headquarters has planned for our news and entertainment?
There are a lot of people over the years in Hollywood who, in response to criticism from various interest groups, when they complain, Hollywood will step up and say, somebody there, including Jack Valenti and other MPA executives and other studio executives, will say, oh, well, movies are just entertainment. You know, don't take it too seriously. That is one of Hollywood's big lies.
The prudent citizen would say, we the people need to start getting concerned about what ideas we let some control group in Hollywood and New York put into our minds. And if movies and media really do reflect the interests, values, cultural perspectives, and prejudices of their makers, do we the people agree with the makers' vision of a global government? A one-world state where America is gone, where everyone is disarmed, where we watch endless TV commercials about the merits of debt, government insurance, and fossil fuel-burning cars as we kill our pain with Big Pharma's pills.
They show drug commercials of a happy family, and they depict what your world at home looks like.
It complements what I'm already doing.
In order to convince you to buy their product. So they are trying to change your behavior. They're trying to take something that is not in your daily life and sell you what they want to be in your daily life.
Ask your doctor about Prestige.
Is this the world we want? The plan being promoted by the mainstream media and its globalist agenda?
Well, that's exactly why I'm asking you to give me your phone number, and then I will pass this message along to his assistant.
Nowhere does the control group in the New York media shine brighter than in their reality show known as the War on Terror. The War on Terror, more accurately known as the War of Terror, has been running on network TV since 2001. Basically a massive co-production between the mainstream media, the military-industrial complex, and the Federal Reserve Bank. The show co-stars not only members of the control group, but neocons, war hawks, the CFR, Zionists, and big oil execs.
Well, the whole war on terror, the drumbeat of fear since 9/11, 16 years of warfare, has definitely made money for the major defense contractors, for Halliburton, for the people that build all the body scanners, for all the surveillance equipment that the NSA uses on all of us. This is, we're talking billions of dollars, big, massive corporations making a lot of money on that fear, on the fear point of the war on terror.
One of the longest running shows ever, the War on Terror, has made the Washington establishment, New York media, and the global power elite trillions of dollars. Banks that finance wars, military contract companies that build the weapons even ISIS uses, oil companies that fuel the whole machine, all advertise on network TV.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Historically, we see that crises are used all too often to justify an expansion of power. And that's something that right after, say, 9/11 had occurred and the Patriot Act was put forth, it's understandable that people are going to be more willing to give up some of their freedom and their ability to control what the government does, because there's the horror of that moment, the sight of watching buildings collapsing on 9/11, that made many Americans much more susceptible to the argument that we need to be stronger.
And the revenues are hundreds of billions of dollars, as well as hundreds of billions more to Big Pharma. After all, the war on terror hurts a lot of people, and these folks then need Big Pharma's product to heal a lot of people. Also, wars always divide and stir up voters. And there is nothing the mainstream media likes more than millions of angry, hostile voters. For angry, hostile voters demand angry, hostile presidential candidates, and angry, hostile candidates tend to buy more angry, hostile TV commercials.
Wake the f*** up! I'm Jeff Wagner. I approve this message.
For a free society to succeed under the conditions we have today, in spite of all the bad moves, if you have freedom of choice as an option, we'll be okay, like a freedom of choice in medical care. And this is why Obamacare was such a threat, because they were trying to get rid of all choices, and you have to have a choice to get out.
You have ignored us. I have called your office incessantly, and I get people who don't know what's going on. I don't get any return phone calls. If I ever fax or email, I get a form letter.
Education, you should have this too. Homeschooling and private schooling represents this option to get out, because they do quite well. And the state-run schools are very embarrassed, and they hate them because it embarrasses their system because they don't do so well. And they're handicapped by the political correctness in the courts and the federal regulations. So the atmosphere is just horrible for a learning experience.
So churning up domestic and world events and promoting the wars and terrorists that result from such chaos are quite profitable for the control group that dominates the mainstream media.
I can pass it along to his assistant, but I cannot guarantee anything.
No discussion of the mainstream media would be complete if its relationship with Israel were ignored. This subject is known as the third rail of politics because no one wants to touch it.
The third rail of politics. Well, there's probably more than one, but the biggest one is probably the Israel issue. Now, you cannot touch Israel without dying professionally, politically, etc. That would be the third rail that anyone in the entertainment business, anyone in the news business, the media, anyone in politics, the Israel issue would have to be the granddaddy of the third rail issues.
I mean, we had a couple of knockdown, drag-out fights, you might recall, talking about those in Congress that support Israel. I didn't like that comment, but we had a debate about it.
There are elements in our society, and they're predominantly on the hard left, that say it's no longer enough to challenge and contradict and defeat or fight these fellows in arguments. We got to smear them, stigmatize them as racist or homophobic, and then we got to silence and censor them. And the way we do it is go after the media outlets that put them on the air, or get him off your network. Otherwise, we're going to go after the advertisers. I think they're engaged in a blacklist, Sean, a blacklist of conservative and traditionalist thought.
We can discuss it here because this documentary is probably not coming to any movie theaters near you. Even still, this documentary does not profess to be a treatise on Israel or to take any sides. All we want to do is make the point that almost every anchor, pundit, politician, and celebrity that appears in the mainstream media totally and uncritically supports Israel.
Anybody that watches this show knows that if I want a key to the city of Tel Aviv, I can get it. I'm about as pro-Israel as can be.
This is amazing, for there does not seem to be this degree of agreement in almost any other human endeavor.
No, I don't know, but I do know who's responsible for it, and that's Hamas.
If there's an event, for example, terrible tragedy between Israel and the Gaza Strip, Palestinians there, and people are killed on both sides. If that's presented in a certain way, your sympathy as a viewer on this side of the television screen, your sympathy can be thrown toward Israel or toward the Palestinians, depending on how it's presented. And it's hard to be objective in a situation like that and present some cases where it looks like this time around this side was the aggressor, but the next time it looks like that side was the aggressor. And when we do that, we always get mail from people who are committed to one side or the other. They're not interested in facts. All they're interested in is which side are you on?
Other media outlets like the BBC in Britain, RT in Russia, the NHK in Japan, and Al Jazeera in Qatar have a much broader spectrum of news and opinions about Israel.
Israel vows to shut down Al Jazeera, accusing the network of incitement in its coverage of the recent protests.
Why is this? Why does the control group of the New York media and the Hollywood-based movie studios only permit a politically correct discourse with regards to Israel?
Hollywood is run by Jews. It's owned by Jews. And they should have a greater sensitivity about the issue of people who are suffering.
Is Brando right? We know that the original movie moguls were mostly Jewish, but since the conglomerates now own the studios, is Hollywood still run by Jews? Abraham Foxman, former national director of the Anti-Defamation League, addressed this question vis-a-vis Mr. Brando's comments.
It was shocking to hear Marlon Brando, an acclaimed actor and champion of civil rights, invoke an anti-Semitic canard that Hollywood is run by Jews. Mr. Brando should know that what he said is utterly false. Hollywood studios are owned and movies are made by men and women, some of whom are Jewish, many of whom are not. Those Jews who entered the movie industry have done so as individuals, not as representatives of their religious group or with an aim to act in some coordinated conspiratorial manner.
We agree with Abe Foxman. Jews in general do not run Hollywood. Thus, Jews in general should not be blamed for any sort of coordinated activities or conspiracies that the mainstream media may or may not be involved with.
Oh, I just wish my Jewish associates in the movie industry would, they come up to me all the time. They say, hey, James, I'm Jewish. How come I don't get a job running the studios? I put in my resume and they won't let me or Marvin Davis run anything in Hollywood. And remember, Marvin Davis was not only Jewish, he was a multi-billionaire.
Recall when insider Alan Ladd led the mass exodus from 20th Century Fox after Marvin Davis had acquired the studio. Yet even he, a multi-billionaire, could not get in to run Hollywood any more than any other outsider, whether Jewish or Gentile.
So, Abe is right. Jews in general do not run Hollywood.
These things acknowledged, along comes Ben Stein in E-Online magazine.
First, it is extremely clear to anyone in Hollywood that Jews are, so to speak, in charge in Hollywood in a way that is not duplicated in any other large business.
It's not fair to say that Hollywood is run by Jews. Jews in general, that's not a fair statement, and I think my studies show that, and that's misleading. And so people who talk about conspiracies or suggest that all Jews are somehow involved in the film industry is not true. There's a lot of Jews all over the world that have no interest whatsoever in what goes on in Hollywood.
So what's the reality? Ever since Neil Gabler, who happens to be Jewish, wrote a book entitled An Empire of Their Own, How the Jews Invented Hollywood, it's been common knowledge that Hollywood was established and run by Jewish movie moguls.
When you look at the leadership of Hollywood, the management, the top-level executives, we recognize that the Jewish elite no more represent the rank-and-file Jewish people than the political elite represent the rank-and-file American voting public.
But some will ask, Given Hollywood was established over 100 years ago, how could it still be run by Jews?
You still don't get it, do you, boys? There ain't no countries anymore. No more good guys. They're running the whole show. They own everything, the whole goddamn planet. They can do whatever they want.
Most of the Hollywood moguls, original Hollywood moguls, were of Jewish heritage, were Jews. And today, about 70% of the control positions, of the power positions in Hollywood are still maintained by these politically liberal, not very religious Jewish males of European heritage. So that's over 115 years or so of continuous and constant control of a very important communications medium by a very narrowly defined group. And my contention is that that's impossible without massive discrimination.
Of the total U.S. population of about 230 million, only about 6,800,000 are Jewish Americans. Thus, Jews represent about 2% of the population. One would therefore expect that only about 2% of the positions in top management of the studios, networks, and conglomerates would thus be held by men and women, some of whom are Jewish, as Abe Foxman put it. Nevertheless, this does not seem to be the case, according to Michael Medved, who observed in the 1996 August edition of Moment magazine the following.
It makes no sense at all to try to deny the reality of Jewish power and prominence in popular culture. Any list of the most influential production executives at each of the major movie studios will produce a heavy majority of recognizably Jewish names.
Hollywood is predominantly run by the Jewish community, and they are the lords of Hollywood for the most part, and they yield a lot of power. And God forbid you should buck that power or in any way say anything from the other point of view, you will immediately be labeled as being anti-Semitic and not part of the crowd, the in crowd. And that's just the way it is.
And then Joel Stein, writing in a December 2008 issue of LA Times, elaborates.
Joel Stein, as a proud Jew, I want America to know that of our accomplishment. Yes, we control Hollywood. Without us, you'd be flipping between the 700 Club and Davy and Goliath on TV all day.
So Neil Gabler says Jews invented Hollywood. Michael Medved says they are a heavy majority. Ben Stein says Jews are in charge, and Joel Stein says they control Hollywood. At least 4 prominent individuals from the Jewish community say, in essence, that Hollywood is run by Jews, just as Marlon Brando stated in 1996.
Hollywood is run by Jews. It's owned by Jews. If it's true, it would mean that those Jews run Hollywood. It doesn't mean that all Jews run Hollywood. And it doesn't mean that the ones who do run Hollywood are doing so as Jews.
So, Jews in general do not run Hollywood. However, about 60 to 70, 80% of the top executive positions in the studios are dominated by Jewish males.
Then along comes Seth MacFarlane, hosting the 2013 Oscars, and Gary Oldman in a 2014 magazine interview, both Gentiles.
Mel Gibson is in a town that's run by Jews, and he said the wrong thing.
You guys have made some beautiful, some inspiring movies. I made Ted. What about you? You got a Berg on the end of your name. Are you Jewish?
Am I Jewish? No, actually, I'm Catholic.
Wrong answer. Try again.
What?
Look, you want to work in this town, or don't you?
After hearing these comments from MacFarlane and Oldman, Abe Foxman and Rabbi Marvin Heyer of the Simon Wiesenthal Center took immediate action.
Every comedian is entitled to wide latitude, but no one should get a free pass for helping to promote anti-Semitism.
What he did at the Oscars was offensive and not remotely funny. It only reinforces stereotypes which legitimize anti-Semitism.
I do not think it is anti-Semitic to simply observe the facts as they exist in reality and report them accurately. Most people seem to be afraid to state the truth and sort of dance around and do the PC thing or whatever. And so I'm simply trying to state the truth, and which are supported by the facts.
Anytime one wants to thwart investigation, into some area, the race card is brought out, and the apologists of Hollywood use the cry of anti-Semitism anytime someone wants to reform Hollywood or investigate its business practices. Is this really acceptable in a democratic society where the free flow of information is vital?
When Neil Gabler, Ben Stein, Michael Medved, and Joel Stein, all Jewish, say Hollywood is run by Jews, they get a pass from organizations ostensibly representing the Jewish community. Yet, when major stars like Marlon Brando, Mel Gibson, Gary Oldman, and Seth MacFarlane, all non-Jews, even joke that Hollywood is run by Jews, they're reprimanded. Is this fair?
But again, that's all that we can do. The person who takes this request is not here.
It seems that Neil Gabler, Michael Medved, Ben Stein, Joel Stein, and Marlon Brando are right. But if Jews enter the movie industry only as individuals, not as representatives of the religion or of the Jewish community, as Abe Foxman says, why do organizations that seem to represent the Jewish community, such as the ADL and Simon Wiesenthal, attack individuals who are simply expressing their opinion about who runs Hollywood?
Yeah, the ADL and similar organizations who seem to take it upon themselves to demonize, vilify, and even destroy anyone who dares to make an objective, much less critical analysis of anything Jewish, I think demonstrates a tremendous bigotry and bias. I mean, this is supposed to be a country in which free speech is not only tolerated, but encouraged. The idea that we all must think the same thing and we all must say the same thing is not consistent with American history and American liberty. Our country was founded and framed on the idea of contrary thought and public debate, taking ideas into the marketplace. That's been the American tradition, and so now over the last few decades, all of that is out the window. If you say anything contrary to whatever the accepted philosophy is at the moment, then you are worthy of disgrace.
In a democratic society where freedom of speech is guaranteed by the First Amendment, should acclaimed actors, or anyone, have to cry and weep before the Hollywood control group and its magistrates for stating what anyone can observe or confirm on the internet?
A couple of years ago, I released the film with passion. Now, even before anyone saw a frame of film, for an entire year, I was subjected to a pretty brutal sort of public beating. And during the course of that, I think I probably had my rights violated in many different ways as an American, you know, as an artist, as a Christian, just as a human being.
4 out of 6 CEOs at the major studios, 5 out of 6 CEOs at the networks, and 4 out of 6 CEOs at the conglomerates are Jewish. Simple math tells us that if 60% of the 54 CEOs in the control group are individuals who happen to be Jewish, a small group of Jewish males not only runs Hollywood, they run the New York networks and the conglomerates. They, in essence, run the entire mainstream media.
When Abe Foxman said that Hollywood is represented, many of them Jewish, he wasn't exactly being truthful. So really, he's putting the Jewish community at risk when he falsifies the number of Jewish studio executives that actually are influencing the selection of motion pictures in the movie industry.
Not only that, a small group of politically liberal, not very religious Jewish males of European heritage has run the Hollywood studios for over 100 years.
My argument is it is not appropriate for any narrowly defined group, don't care who it is, to control an important communications medium like the motion picture. If you had a group of Southern Baptists running Hollywood, a group of African Americans, a group of Native Americans, we'd be seeing different kinds of films. There's no question about that, because again, movies tend to mirror the values, interests, cultural perspectives, and prejudices of their makers. So that really then tends to be sort of private propaganda, private censorship being employed.
Even though these are the facts, it is important to remember the distinction articulated by Abe Foxman that Jews enter the movie industry only as individuals and not as representatives of their religion or the Jewish community.
But the minute you have someone like Abe Foxman saying that Jews don't operate in any kind of concerted manner, yet you have an organization that represents Jews in general, such as the ADL, chastising somebody like Marlon Brando, you in essence do have Jews in general influencing at least the knowledge and perception of Hollywood. So you're invoking the Jewish community. Anytime you represent the Jewish community in something like the ADL or the Simon Wiesenthal Center, you're basically making Jews in general look like apologists for the Hollywood movie industry. And if the Hollywood movie industry is using predatory practices or discrimination to stay in power, a lot of people are going to blame the Jewish community for this.
Those Jews who entered the movie industry have done so as individuals.
But even as individuals, there are implications. For if movies mirror their makers, as we previously covered, the implications are well stated by Michael Medved.
The combined weight of so many Jews in one of America's most lucrative and important industries gives the Jews of Hollywood a great deal of political power. They are a major source of money for Democratic candidates.
Is this not almost exactly what Ben Bagdikian, the Supreme Court, and John Cones are saying? Media power is political power, and movies are an important communications channel that mirrors the interests, values, cultural perspectives, and prejudices of their makers.
I think it's self-evidently true, as John Combs said, that the makers of movies are going to reflect their own interests, values, prejudices, and convictions, if you will. It's obvious that's the way most people operate in general. You're certainly not going to produce a movie that reflects someone else's values that are antagonistic to yours. So the mainstream media promotes the globalist agenda, number one, because they believe in the globalist agenda, the control group. But I think number two, indirectly, to the extent that they promote ideas that are subversive of popular power, popular sovereignty, local control. The consequence of that is to aid globalist machinations.
Pennsylvania goes to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the President of the United States.
Everybody is crying.
And since most Jews are Democrats and most Democrats are liberal, would this not explain why we have a liberal media?
You're awake, by the way.
How do we explain how this is possible?
This was a white lash.
The only checks and balances we have are us, the View.
And some media that calls for such things as the endless infringement of the Second Amendment with all manner of regulations.
Do you think it's time to take a look at assault weapons and discuss possibilities of changing laws pertaining to them?
So, given these things, we come back to the question of Israel. How many of the top executives in the networks and studios are prejudiced in favor of Israel? In short, how many executives in the mainstream media control group are Zionists?
There is another reason the media is liberal. Movies are creations of art. And when you're making a fantasy or a creation of art, you're always trying to push the limits, okay? So by the very nature of art, by the very nature of movies, they're going to be liberal. They're going to be progressive. You're going to progress into new areas. You're going to explore the fringes and the outer extremities of existence.
If 60% of the network, studio, and conglomerate CEOs are Jewish Zionists, this may be why anchors, pundits, politicians, and celebrities all tread carefully around the third rail of politics, Israel, the Jewish state.
The Jewish leadership in New York City media and in Hollywood is extensive, as we've already discussed. And would that be the reason why free thought is not allowed on the subject of Israel, whether it be on the talk shows, the newscasts, Hollywood itself? Yes, I think the answer is an emphatic and obvious yes. That's the reason.
The issue is whether we the people should be concerned when none of our political candidates can get coverage from the mainstream media unless they're uncritically pro-Israel. Many American voters and taxpayers do not feel the U.S. should be involved in Middle Eastern affairs as much as we are. Look at what our involvement has already done. Caused wars, 3,500 American lives, 4,500 civilian lives from drone attacks.
And when you have a group of people, I don't care who it is, that refuse to allow another group of people the opportunity to even express themselves without the fear of the destruction of their way of life and their livelihood, you know, is totally, totally foreign to anything this country was built upon.
$5 trillion in debt and taxes, the deaths of millions of indigenous people around the Middle East, the rise of ISIS, and worldwide threats of terror. Now even terrorist attacks on American soil.
I don't think every political candidate, or most political candidates, take a pro-Israel position, or at least say that they're pro-Israel, they're going to defend Israel, Israel is our greatest ally in the Middle East, or whatever. I don't think they all say that because there's Jewish influence on them. They say it because that's what those people in their constituencies believe. Of course, the media people, they're hired, and they don't have much of a chance because there's employment discrimination, in a sense, there, right? They're going to be hired by control group people who are favorable to Israel, and therefore they need to be favorable to Israel or they'll never get the job.
If the control group were comprised of fewer Zionists and more Arabs or Muslims, would coverage of Israel be more balanced? Would the U.S. military be stationed all over the Middle East?
Unfortunately, because of the stranglehold over the entertainment industry, over the news industry, the New York media, and the Hollywood industry itself, it's almost impossible for people who have differing opinion to be freely able to express it. That is the problem. That's one of the major problems in the mainstream media today.
If a candidate is vilified by the mainstream media for taking a stand that is not politically correct, is it okay that the candidate will probably be ostracized, hence never get elected?
And Congressman Ron Paul is with us tonight. It's an honor to have you, sir. You're a leader of a movement. Sometimes you remind me of my hero growing up, who was in fact Barry Goldwater.
Oh, well,
and then I grew up.
The problem is the lack of diversity, not the fact that they're Jewish or the fact that they're liberal or the fact that they're males. None of the factors in the demographic are the problem. It's the problem of all of the factors aligning in a combination that locks the control group into a certain pattern of thought, a certain pattern of interests, cultural values, beliefs, and prejudices.
This idea that government will take care of me, no, but that means that somebody will. Doesn't the person have to take responsibility and buy health insurance?
What would be the reaction of many people in Hollywood today if all of a sudden we said, you know, 60% of the upper management in Hollywood and the top level executives were, let's say, Muslims? What would be the reaction to that?
There's a revolution going on, Chris.
Until we allow people to be free, to be able to express themselves, their talents, their abilities, their thought, their philosophies in a free and open debate, until we have that, let's face it, we're in an oppressed society.